Hello, students. I wanted to post a video to do a week 2 wrap up. I just completed grading all of the assignments for week 2, with the exception of participation. So I'll be doing that next. To start off with are two discussion questions. The first was about clients or not diagnoses. And I think everyone did a really great job discussing this from your own perspectives, from your experience, all of that kind of stuff. I think it is really important for us to remember the importance of diagnosis in many situations. One is for reimbursement and also, you know, a way to kind of understand different providers and kind of speak a common language, and also recognize a lot of the areas where it can be considered a limitation or weakness, where clients might feel labeled. Different providers might kind of judge clients in a certain way because of a diagnosis. And diagnoses sometimes can sort of follow someone indefinitely when the diagnosis itself may be outdated for that person. In addition, individual clients feel different ways about diagnoses. I've definitely had clients that felt sort of empowered by the diagnoses, like recognizing that, like, I always thought there was something wrong with me, or there was something specific to me that was an issue. And now that I recognize that it's part of this diagnosis, I realize that, I didn't always have a choice in some of the things that I was doing and the ways that I was behaving, that it was this diagnosis. And now I feel like I'm able to take control of it and do something about it. Whereas other clients feel very labeled by it and minimized, or not seen by having that diagnosis. And so it's important to have that conversation, to have a good understanding of where you're at with it, the necessity for it, and also areas where clients might struggle with it, and being able to be open to that kind of conversation with your clients. So that's pretty much it for that one. For discussion question 2, balancing the art and science of psychotherapy, I really enjoyed reading all of your responses and the conversation that you had with each other regarding this discussion question, and how you might balance these two things. I think most people had some, similarities about, ways in which these two things are sort of blended together, and we have to have one. We have to have both because we really can't have one without the other. And so again, I really enjoyed this. This was one of, I think, the common arguments with our field is that in many ways the sort of hard scientists don't accept it because they don't see it as a hard science. But we're more than just an art as well. There is a lot of scientific backing. Those, like, those treatments that have been shown to be effective for different populations and things like that. And so there is a little bit of both in our field. The diagnostic specialization table, there's not a ton to say about that. Everyone who turned it in did a great job identifying some diagnosis. I was often curious about why you chose the diagnosis. Some of you, I did notice, you said that you were in the field of addictions, or that's what you want to specialize in, and your diagnosis were focused on that, or trauma, or whatever. Some of you had a few like different diagnoses, and I think that made me a little bit more curious about why you specifically chose those. But it was really good to see all of you do that. I think that one thing that was really interesting with this assignment is, the very last column on the right asked about like differential diagnosis. So, what are some other diagnoses that you might look at for roughly the same types of symptoms and presentation? And it really made me think about how important a table like this can be, when you are doing a differential diagnosis with a client, sitting down and looking at, a couple different diagnoses that could be possible, even some that you're like, questionable, I don't know that fits, but really putting down the different requirements for each diagnosis, what you're seeing from your client, and really sorting it out in a table very similar to this, so that you can do your differential diagnoses and come up with one that seems to fit the client and the client's circumstances as best it can, or even ruling out different diagnoses as ones that really don't fit. So I thought that was a pretty good assignment, and I think that there's definitely uses for it moving forward. So hopefully you can find that helpful. Finally, this week we had the synthesis of DSM perspectives. Again, I really enjoyed reading your papers and hearing about not only your personal kind of perspectives, but also what the research said. I think most people that turn this in shows really great resources, really interesting ones. Hopefully you all learned a lot from this. A couple of people mentioned the DSM-5 being the only one they've practiced from. I am seasoned enough, I don't want to say old enough, seasoned enough to have worked with the DSM-4 TR, but there's definitely people in our field who've worked with the original DSM-4 and even some that have worked with DSMs prior to that. And so there've been a number of changes throughout the different volumes. This one was a pretty significant change in that it got rid of the axis system completely. And at first making this adjustment, I know I kind of struggled with like, wait, what are we doing without these axes and how are we looking at things different and trying to figure it out. But I think that for the most part, there are a number of advantages to this DSM. There probably are lots of limitations that have become apparent since the switch, but also limitations that there have sort of always been as well with any kind of instrument like this. So again, I appreciate reading your assignments. It's good to recognize that the DSM is part of our field and probably will be for a very long time, especially because of insurance companies and this idea that we need to have something like that to be like a hard science and to kind of fit with the medical profession and all of that. But that there are limitations to it. And, you know, I know that some places that I've worked, for example, at the College Counseling Center, we didn't do any diagnoses unless the client was seeing the psychiatrist. The psychiatrist would do diagnoses, or if the client needed needed a diagnostic assessment for a specific reason, like to get accommodations, they would have to qualify for a specific diagnosis, and we would have to do that assessment and see if they fit or not, different things like that. So there were some cases where diagnosis was necessary, but for the most part, if you needed counseling, you came in, you got counseling, and not that it didn't matter what your diagnosis was, but that wasn't what the primary focus was on. We didn't want to just not include anyone in the counseling process just because they didn't fit really clearly into a specific diagnosis. And so that is it for week 2. As you see, my background, I downloaded GCU, so hopefully we all feel a little bit at home with this background of GCU, even though we're sort of all over the country. Any questions or anything moving forward, please let me know. Some of you have been contacting me in the private forum. That's awesome. If you have a question that you think that the answer could benefit your peers, definitely post it in the public questions forum. And other than that, have a really great week. And I look forward to checking out all of your assignments for week 3.